Penda became king of Mercia between 626 and 628. At that time, Christianity was still very much in its infancy among the English kingdoms, with Augustine having only arrived on these shores some 30 years after Penda became king. According to the Anglo Saxon chronicles, Penda was 50 years old when he became king and had the kingdom for 30 years, meaning he would have been in his or close to his 80s when he died, which would have been a remarkably long life for a king in this age. It is now generally regarded that Penda was a much younger man when he became king, probably in his early 20s, which would account for the fierce nature of his kingship. From almost the very outset of his reign, Penda was at war. At Cirencester, he defeated King Cyngils of Wessex and forced him into a truce that was favourable to Mercia. But it was at the Battle of Hatfield Chase in 633 where Penda would really prove his credentials in battle. Allied with Cadwallin, king of the Britons, described by Florence of Worcester as being an even fiercer heathen than the Mercian king, Penda and Cadwallin destroyed the army of King Edwin of Northumbria, with Edwin himself falling in the battle. According to the Venerable Bede, the battle was followed by a brutal slaughter, as Penda and Cadwallin spared neither women nor innocent children, putting them to horrible deaths. Such savagery was indicative of the times, and Penda was perfectly happy to show absolute ruthlessness. One of Edwin's sons, Eadfrid, had submitted to Penda, but this counted for very little, as Penda and Cadwallin later had him executed, no doubt suspecting Eadfrid would one day seek revenge if they allowed him to live. According to Bede, it was after Hatfield Chase that Penda became king of Mercia, whereas before he had simply been a warrior of the Mercian royal house, although I am certainly much more inclined to think that Penda was a king at the time of the Battle of Hatfield Chase. Chroniclers, both near contemporary, such as Bede, and later writers, such as Florence of Worcester, would have certainly been biased against Penda and had a great distaste for him based on his pagan beliefs and practices. But it was acknowledged that Penda was a prince of distinguished bravery, although Bede would rather sniffily remark that Penda's reign of 22 years, remembering Bede's differing dates, would be of mixed success. Penda would then turn his attention to fighting the King of East Anglia, Egric, who was supported by his predecessor, his cousin Siegbert, who had surrendered his crown in hope of a quieter life as a monk. However, when the war with Penda broke out, Siegbert joined his cousin, only for Penda to emerge triumphant once more, and both Egric and Siegbert were killed. It seems a fair guess that by this stage Penda was emerging as something of a top dog among the Anglo-Saxon kings, although it remained very much a dog-eat-dog world. In 641 or perhaps 642, Penda would be responsible for the death of another Christian king, Oswald of Northumbria, the nephew of Edwin, whom he defeated at the Battle of Maserfield. After Oswald's burial, stories of miracles across Britain were attributed to Oswald's holiness, as people travelled from far and wide to visit the site of where Oswald had fallen in battle, to seek cures for their diseases and ailments. Aside from being a brutally talented warrior, Penda also showed himself to be a man not to double cross. In 645, Penda deposed and forced the King of Wessex into exile in East Anglia after he had lost interest in Penda's sister, although the king would return to his kingdom a couple of years later. Actions such as this demonstrate quite plainly how confident in his own power Penda had become. In 654, waging war once more against the East Angles, Penda killed another of their kings, Arna, at the Battle of Bolkamp. Despite Penda's killing of a number of Christian kings, this great pagan warrior was not opposed to Christianity. The opposite, in fact. His own son, Peda, and Peda's own followers were baptized, whilst the Venerable Bede said this of Penda's own attitudes towards Christianity. Nor did King Penda obstruct the preaching of the word among his people, the Mercians, if any were willing to hear it. But on the contrary, he hated and despised those whom he perceived not to perform the works of faith when they had once received the faith, saying they were contemptible and wretched who did not obey their God, in whom they believed. This was begun 2 years before the death of King Penda. In 655, Penda died, with his own death fittingly coming in battle, as he waged war once more against the Northumbrians, but this time he was defeated and killed at the Battle of Winwade. It was a significant moment in early English history. This great pagan warrior king of Mercia, who had ruled by the sword, hammering his neighbours in battles and cutting down Christian kings, was himself now dead. For paganism in England, Penda of Mercia was the last great hurrah as the Anglo Saxons moved towards a truly Christian age.